And indeed, we're continuing our discussion from last week, now focusing on from dream to reality. And the dreams of those who were coming even before the modern state was declared. And we know that we have dreamed for so many years. As it says here in our Sidur, Tka b'shofar gadol l'cherutenu, v'sa nes l'kabetz goliotenu. That's a phrase that I'm sure you know. L'kabetz, you can see the shoresh, kuf bet sadi, that's where the word kibbutz or kvutza, group, or kovetz, which is a file, all based on that same shoresh. And so bring us together, kibbutz galuyot. Everyone who lives outside of Israel lives in the galut. Now, because it's not forced upon us, it's called the Golah. But here we are praying that someday, sound the great shofar for our freedom, raise the banner to gather our exiles and gather us together from the four corners of the earth. Blessed are you, God, who gathers in the dispersed of his people, Israel. And it happens. On that note, I don't know if the other Jerusalemites will agree with me, but I would like to thank you for saying Tfilat HaGeshem, because you know, when you say the prayer for rain in Toronto, you're actually praying for us to get rain. You don't have to pray for rain, you get plenty of it. And your prayers have been heard because we have had rain for the last couple of days. Not like the rain you get, but we have been getting the rain. So thank you.
And early, a little bit early.
Yeah.
It's nice.
It is, but anyway, so once the reality is that we can go to Palestine, people in Europe are asking themselves still, where do I go from here? And despite the hardships and the need to believe that we come to Palestine, as it was called then, and we will be free, it's understandable that there were those who feared coming to a new land and chose, rather than to come here, to go to the United States of America. Would they do that now? Marlene, don't answer. So what I'm looking to do today is to talk about the dreams before and when they come, and then some of the tensions and decisions people, both laymen and leaders, have to make. And so I want you to hear different voices, and I'm sharing now from a Melina Graf, who was in the Krakow ghetto and then the Plaszow camp, and she says the following. You don't have it with you. We heard of the difficulties that the British Mandate rule was creating for newcomers to Palestine. And I guess what I'm looking for you to do as you listen to several different voices that I'll be sharing, do you picture yourself feeling that way or not understanding their choice, etc.? And these deterred me. You hear that there are difficulties for the newcomers. Of course, that's going to frighten you. The British were turning back the ships that sailed for Palestine and took the passengers to Cyprus. Many Jews did not care, and they did choose to emigrate illegally, and they were called ma'apilim. Graduates of the German concentration camps were not frightened by the British soldiers, but my sisters and I did not want to risk ending up in an internment camp on Cyprus. We had had our fill of barbed wire. Our choice was clear-cut. We had no desire to return to Poland. None of our close relatives had survived the war. And most important, all that Poland represented to us was anti-Semitism, which at times rivaled the Nazi anti-Semitism in viciousness and brutality. Poland was even less attractive now because it had become a satellite nation of the Soviet Union. I had lived for over 2 years in Russian-occupied Lvov, and I had no taste for the Soviet brand of communism. To remain in Germany was out of the question. We had been witness to far too many tragedies in this country to be able to start a new life within its borders. It would be impossible to find peace in a land whose earth was soaked with Jewish tears and Jewish blood. We wanted to go to the United States of America, about which we had heard so much. We loved the United States from afar and wished to make our new home there. And that was our decision. We would live in the United States. And then on the other hand, there were those who decided, and very enthusiastically, that they were going to make their way to Palestine, despite what Melina just described. And they were willing to do this illegally. And Yaakov Orland writes this song at that time about the immigrants. And we'll take a look at several short folk songs written at that time and try to pay attention and see if you see any symbolism and why a word or a trait is presented as it is. And we'll develop a sense of what the period was like, certainly emotionally, and what the psyche of the new immigrant was for the most part. So Yaakov Orland writes, a wind and a tall mast and horizons, your shores, O master of the sea, how distant they are. Arise, O sailors, to the oars, the way lies ahead. The storms rage, roll on, O waves, roll on, wave in the heart. Dance, dance, Mapilim. The harbor draws near. So why the use of the word wind and distant, and then mentioning to the oars to make the boat move? Why is that repeated twice? Read it again to yourselves for a moment.
We can't read it because the screen isn't shared.
Bev?
No, we can't.
We don't have it.
It's coming.
Hit the
Why did you wait so long?
The first one you didn't read, so I thought the second one too.
No, just a second. Done. Now?
Yes.
Yeah, we see it.
I'll read it again. A wind and a tall mast and horizons, your shores, O master of the sea, how distant they are. Arise, O sailors, to the oars, to the oars. The way lies ahead. The storms rage. Roll on, O waves. Roll on, wave in the heart. Dance, dance, Mapilim. The harbor draws near. So picture this boat with these immigrants packed on top of each other. And all that keeping them going is knowing where they will be landing. So the wind, what kind of symbol is that? Why does there have to be a wind?
A wind and a breath. God created man with his breath.
Yes. But
is the Hebrew word like ruach, wind and spirit?
yes, but let's think very practically
The wind
and
pushes
physically.
the boat.
Picture the boat.
Well, the wind pushes the boat.
Okay, well, is it pushing it toward, or are they needing to fight the wind to reach their destination? In other words, even though they are desperate to arrive, it doesn't mean it's an easy trip.
No, because they said roll on, roll on.
Okay, and that the fact that the oars are mentioned twice is meant to tell us that it's difficult. And the use of the word, the shores, O master of the sea, how distant they are. What does that word distant represent here? We have refugees on this boat, and the shores will be there, but they might still be a little skeptical and thinking it's distant, perhaps a little unattainable. Until you actually get there, it would be
Right.
logical that they would have a sense, is this really going to happen?
To me, the shore, the chof, is a separation. Just like within the word chuppah, that the couple separates from the rest of the people. So
Mhm.
this is going to be the separation. The chof will come to the chof.
Okay.
You know what, Bracha, I'm
Marlene.
seeing it in a different way. I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm distinctly aware that this is a difficult journey for the refugees. And I looked at the first wind as being the winds of war that actually held them back from this destination. And they had to live through that wind, and they had this dream of going, hence the word horizons, that they thought about, but they were being held back by circumstances, by the winds of war. And they were going to, now they had come through that first wind, and they had to work to get to their destination again. And hopefully now the wind was behind them and helping them on the journey.
It makes
Magnificent, Marlene. Absolutely. That's the beauty. It's
Like-
like Perushim, reading the same text and in different ways.
makes me think of Beth Midler's song, "The Wind Beneath My Wings."
Uh-huh. Yeah. Beautiful.
And
Okay.
it also says the
Yeah.
storms rage. And there's that, again, I'm just thinking about all the different times when they're rowing in, and still there's the risk of the British capturing them
Absolutely.
until they can really, get there on the shore. And that's why I think that shore is sometimes very distant.
Yeah.
I think that at the beginning, it's a hopeful beginning 2 lines, maybe even 3 lines, 3
Uh-huh.
and a half a wind, they're setting out, a tall mast, good combination, horizons to seek, and then your shores, so master of the sea, but how distant they are. So what does one have to do? You have to be filled with a spirit of anger and dancing and hope and activity, and to row and row and row, because that's the only way you're going to get there.
But I think what you're pointing to also is they're going, but it involves mixed emotions and also mixed actions.
Yeah.
You're right. Rage, but usually you think of dance as something positive. Wonderful suggestions. Wonderful suggestions. And
Seems a
so,
lot of this can be a metaphor for challenges we face in life, the tailwinds,
Absolutely.
the headwinds, and the dreamed for destination, for a respite and relaxation, and maybe a renewal.
absolutely, Elliot. Absolutely. Wonderful. Now, so those who did decide to come here, there was unity on the one hand, but there were Jews who were coming with different ideologies, different beliefs, energized by their own ideals.
Yes.
And to that end, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there were two other songs and poems that were candidates for becoming the national anthem of Israel. And we'll just take a quick look at them and see if you can see how they differ and why you think ultimately Tikvah was chosen. And even Tikvah, you'll see that we don't sing the original, which was much longer. So quickly, the first is by one of our greatest national poets, Chaim Nachman Bialik, who lived 1873 to 1934. And he composed this in 1894, which means he was 21 years old. And it didn't make it to the finals, but it did become the anthem for the Labor Zionist group. And it's called Birkat Am, the people's blessing, or perhaps better known by the first word, Techazakna. Techazakna, da-dun, da-da-da. Okay, so, and you will find this actually initially in the Siddur of the Reconstructionist movement in 1945. So let's just see what he's suggesting and how it compares with Hatikvah and then the other suggestion. Strengthen the hands of all our brothers who cherish the dust of our homeland, wherever they are. Let not your spirits fall, happy ones rejoice. Come as one to support the people. Each trek we account and hold dear, each teardrop and sweat upon brow that fall like dew for Yisrael, reviving its debilitated soul. So wait upon, and forevermore may each tear be sanctified, which fell into our sea of tears, an offering to the people, each drop of brow sweat paving the path of Adonai like sweat and blood. If to build to the roof a lifetime suffice not, and you lay but the base of your national home, enough have you wrought, your achievement despise not, that they come after will yet lay the line. What a deliberate people are we. Step by step, we raise up the desolate ruins and rebuild them eternally. From sea to sea, go forth and be amazed. to see what the smallest among nations has wrought, the wandering people. And why do the laggards take their time dragging their feet? The worker of Israel, are they an enigma? Hey, be strengthened, dispersed ones. Unite and stand tall. Work your portion as one with valor and might. Do not say we are not worthy. In short time, you will observe the visage of the mighty one of Yaakov going off to battle. From the days of Zerubbabel, our hands have not wrought deeds as mighty as this or as numerous. Scorn not small deeds, but scoffers despising, rescue your people with hoe and with plow, till we hear from the head of the mountains the signal for rising. The time for redemption has come, it is now. Now you might be saying to yourselves, well, we at Beth Tikvah, who end with the anthem, we'd never get to Kiddush if we sang this long version. But keep what was in mind, and a few words should have struck you that we will not necessarily see in the Hatikvah. And this is a version by Naftali Imber in 1878, who immigrated in 1882 to Ottoman-ruled Palestine. And we know that this was adopted at the first Zionist Congress. So, and it says, we're all familiar, as long as in the heart within the soul of a Jew still yearns and onward toward the corner of the east, and eye still looks toward Sion, our hope is not yet lost, the ancient hope, to return to the land of our ancestors, the city where David encamped. As long as tears from our eyes flow like benevolent rain, and throngs of our countrymen still pay homage to the graves of our ancestors. Okay, this is many more paragraphs than the one that we actually sing. As long as our precious wall appears before our eyes, and over the destruction of our temple, and eye still wells up with tears, as long as the waters of the Ardain in fullness swell its banks, and from the Yam Kinneret in tumult fall with a cacophonous voice, as long as on the barren highways the humbled city gates mark, and among the ruins of Yerushalayim a daughter of Zion still cries, as long as pure tears flow from the eye of a daughter of my people, and to mourn for Zion at the watch of night, she still rises in the middle of the nights. What can you already tell me is one difference between what we just read by Bialik and this?
What stands out to me is
Yes.
tears. The word tears is repeated. And I wonder if, as much as I don't hate to say this, if it's not necessary to cry to experience the opposite, the redemption, relief, and joy from better days.
I see it as having a being directed at two different groups of people.
Go ahead.
The first one by Bialik,
Yes.
it reminded me while you were reading it of the Union song "Solidarity Forever," and the Union will be strong, and it pointed at those people who are coming and uniting them together in one effort. This actually realizes the fact that not everybody is going to come to Israel, that there are going to be people who are going to love the country and yet be living somewhere else, but will be longing for the benefits that should befall the country for as long as they live. It will always be a part of their lives, even though they're not there.
Yeah, I look at
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
I also see the different groups of people. Bialik, let's not forget, has a tremendous influence that Herzl succeeded, because Bialik's poetry kind of paved the way for the people to be ready to accept what Herzl had to say. But when it came to the Tikvah, I think a very large portion of the community was not religious. They were secular, and the Tikvah applies to everybody.
Yeah. Okay, there are a couple of instances in Bialik where he refers to God more than in Tikvah. And that issue it actually comes up in the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, so it
I have a
could be
question,
one of
Bracha.
the reasons. Yeah, Elliot.
I think if Jews are supposed to be an Or L'Goyim, and if
Yes.
every Jew on the planet would be in Israel, what about those Jews who are in Toronto and elsewhere who somehow are a positive light, exemplary, who would, in their relationship with non-Jews outside of Israel, lead our potential enemies and others who are uninformed about what it's like to be Jewish and our mission? We have a positive influence on them. Do we all have to be in Israel?
Yes.
Bracha.
Elliot,
Okay.
it's a great question, and I think it deserves its own class. So I'm not putting you off. I could say a few things here now, but I'd rather not. But we will. Okay, I promise.
But Bracha,
Frida.
Can you just go back? I want to see what's written in Bialik's, because does Bialik actually mention Israel and Jerusalem, whereas the other one does?
Okay, he mentions homeland.
Yes, but he doesn't say Israel.
Yeah, no, he does. That
Oh.
fall like dew for Yisrael.
Okay.
Okay,
Because I found it kept, Tikvah kept specifying Jerusalem and Israel.
and he mentions the path of Adonai.
Well, that's, that's.
Yeah.
That's everywhere.
Whereas
Bracha,
doesn't.
not all of the Jews came to Israel for a Zionist reason, because my great-great-grandfather, going back many generations, wanted to be buried in Israel. And they came by sailboat through Turkey to Israel because he wanted to be buried in the Holy Land.
Well, that's another question that we can tie in with Eliot's about. He's not the only one that wanted to come just to be buried. And there's a wonderful song, but I'll save it for that class about that very issue.
Bracha.
Yes.
I probably would really need to read it. We probably would longer and spend more time. But it seemed to me that Bialik's poem was sort of looking backwards.
Mhm.
And the Hatikva we sing, it really, everything, Kol Od B'Lev, constantly in our, it ends with hope.
And begins.
I don't know if that's.
Okay, you're right. And I can actually try to send these to you so that you could, in your own time, take a deeper look at these. And the third suggestion was by Rav Avram Yitzchak Kook, the first Ashkenazi, a chief rabbi of
Bracha, Stephen has
mandatory
to say
Palestine. Stephen.
Well, I do have a comment about Elliot's comment. It's somewhat inaccurate because we know that on here right now, out of 27 people, 2 people are physically in Israel,
3.
but the other 3, and the other 24 people are also in Israel, not physically, but in our neshama, in our heart, in everything we do. In our day-to-day lives, we're always in Israel.
Okay, Stephen. All right. But we will, I believe, talk about it. Okay. Okay. So Rav Kook, his couldn't be more obvious, Shir HaEmunah, Song of Faith. Now, we remember that what made Rav Kook, one of the things that made him so great is that he, as traditional as he was, realized that we were to be grateful to the secular pioneers, Chalutzim, who made it possible for us to return to the land. And he was very often criticized by his cohort due to the fact that he was showing respect to these secular Jews. And he says the following: forever in our hearts lives the loyal faith. He's literally talking about emunah, to return to our holy land and the city where David encamped. There we shall stand to receive our destiny, which the father of many nations acquired. There we shall live our life, the life of the innumerable community. There we shall serve our Elohah, God, with joy, happiness, and song. There we shall pilgrimage 3 times a year. A Torah of life. There you got it. All right. He's being very specific that we're meant to live a Torah life given from the mouth of Elyon, the supreme being. Eternal is our heritage from the wilderness. It was gifted. So we know which anthem was chosen. And this phenomenon of having to recognize that our people ultimately, I believe, is united. And as Stephen said, on the other hand, very diverse, very diverse. Now, my next question is, who must come on board? Who would these leaders, these thinkers, address immediately to encourage people becoming chalutzim? What would be the community, the population that they would go after? For very practical reasons.
The young.
The young, Stephen. Okay, is your hand up as well, or just to give the answer?
Yeah, it says well. So I'm not sure what the poetry, what the song is, what poem it is on the left side on the screen. My comment is that it doesn't seem to be Tikvatenu. It's not Tikvatenu, right? It's Rav Kook's proposal
Yeah, that's the
for a
Shir
national anthem.
Emunah, Song
Right.
of Faith.
Okay, but so we're not talking about Tikvatenu right now. The 7
right now.
stanzas and the original, and what we sing today is not the
No,
original Hatikva. It is
Yeah.
not.
no.
Al Jolson sang the original Hatikva in the 1920s, and
You're
I
right.
know, and that's what I sing. And by the way, the only shul that I've ever come across that sings Hatikva after Adon Olam is Beth Tikva. Just to let you know, and you all know that who are members of Beth Tikva. No other shul, and every shul should, because it's not political. It's something far more than political. It's the voice
Not
of the
one
people.
other shul in Toronto?
No, one other
Wow.
shul, and I go to a dozen
Yes,
to
you make
5
the
dozen
rounds.
shuls. I know them. Yep, yep. I'm from
Okay.
Australia. Even in Australia, I go to shul. In London, England. Never mind LA and New York and South America. I've been to shul, of course, virtually. And this is the only shul that sings of it. And that's why I love Beth Tikva. They don't do it. I love the people, all of you here. Right, Michael? Okay. Bye-bye. And Esther,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. So I
I
would like to just share with you one leader who I believe we're all familiar with, Yosef Trumpeldor. And I want you to listen to the short paragraph that I'm going to share with you and try to picture how would the youth of today respond to this? Would the youth of today be only too happy to have the experience of building a new land? So he says, we need people ready to serve at any cost at whatever task Palestine requires. The metal, whatever is needed to forge anything, whatever the national machine will require. Is there a wheel lacking? I am that wheel. Nails, screws, a block? Take me. Must the land be dug? I will dig it. Is there shooting to be done? Are soldiers needed? I will enlist policemen, doctors, lawyers, teachers, water carriers. If you please, I am ready to do it all. I am not a person. I am the pure embodiment of service, prepared for everything. I have no ties. I know only one command: build. Now, I'd like to hear some reactions to Troubadour's message.
It was in the past a dream, starting with Herzl, of course, and those at that time, and especially in 1948 when Joe and Irving Matlow and Joe went there on that first week. However, it has been a more rapid decline in recent generations, in the recent decades. That interest, I perceive it greatly. It has been tainted somewhat by the rhetoric that our young have unfortunately succumbed to at universities and elsewhere. Of course, when you see schools like Bialik and the USDS, and if unfortunately they've declined as well, as you well know. So I fear that honestly that this desire and interest to actually physically do this interest has declined to some degree.
As a follow-up to what Steve said, Bracha, I have a question.
Yes, Elliot.
I find it difficult looking at this from the perspective of the context in which this was written and what's going on today. If it says a Torah of life is our desire, and if we look at Israel today, it certainly is not a very holy land. I don't mean historically or spiritually, but I mean in terms of levels of observance. There are many Israelis who live in the US and elsewhere, and there are many people from elsewhere who have gone to Israel, the back and forth. So what is the ideal, and how do you separate out the confusion of how we're to look at this from the perspective of then, when this was written, or the realities of now?
Okay, so let me just say the following briefly. A Torah of life. So that's not Troubadour's words now. You're getting back to this anthem. But a Torah of life doesn't just mean the mitzvahs of living a Torah life in the way I believe you're perceiving it. You know, does this person keep kosher, keep Shabbat? And that's why we can't do this just within a moment. Secondly, to say that many Israelis now don't observe, yes, that's true. But what is it that they don't observe? And what is it that they do that Rav Kook so respected and said was necessary? And yes, you're going to have Israelis. They're going to live elsewhere. And some of those Israelis are going to be observant and others are not. But when you talk about Torah or Israel as an Or LaGoyim, that doesn't mean that we are going to now be perfect. It's a challenge. You want to live in the real world and you want to be a nation, you're going to confront challenges, but you don't say, because it's not, as you might perceive, that every Israeli is observant, that the experiment has failed. Now I'm going to leave it at that, please.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
Bracha, I look at it a little bit differently. I think that my generation and my children's generation had Israel at the core of their hearts. That's why the donations and everything else was the center of our synagogues and so on. But today, Israel is a strong country on its own. And because of that, it's a positive and a negative. the responsibility and the desire to do for Israel is smaller in the third generation.
I think that's an important issue, and that's a topic also of how that gut emotion, perhaps, your generation might have had it more in the neshama, as again, Stephen said, but didn't have the same academic knowledge and learning, but which is more important when discussing or when identifying with Israel, that it's got to be in your neshama, and if it's not there, no matter how much you learn at what you said, Bialik or USDS, it's just not going to work. Yeah. But again, let's save that for another time. Esther, please. Okay.
You also talked about the Rav Kook. Rav Kook, besides being very orthodox and went by the Torah, he also looked for what's good for the country. And
that's what I said. That's why he respected the pioneers, the secular pioneers that allowed us to rebuild. Absolutely.
He allowed the etrog in Sukkot to be bought from Israel, even though it's Shemitah year, because it was good for the economy.
Yes. No, that's what he had, a Rosh Gadol, as they would say. He used his head and was thinking in broad terms. Now,
Bracha,
Marlene.
When Trumpeldor is speaking.
Yes, go ahead. Let's get back to that.
He's speaking of in a certain idealistic kind of way. Mm-hmm. He's speaking of all of the tasks, big and small, that are going to be in the land for people to do, and it doesn't matter what you do. Everything is going to be important towards building the land. Unfortunately, and it almost reminded me as you were speaking, it reminded me of they used to say in the United States, go west, young man, because there was the rare opportunity to come from the bottom up and build something new. Unfortunately, I think a lot of that idealism is lost because of the fact, as we said, Israel has become a very successful country. And I don't think that this generation of children are used to the idea of building something from the ground up.
Absolutely. And I think that's, God forbid you should face wars but there's something magnificent in being able to be at the beginning of a project like that. Absolutely. Yeah. It not being handed to you, it's very, very exciting.
What you do see happening, and where an idealism of a different kind is built, is when you take groups of young people to Israel, and they are able to see the successes that have been built in spite of the obstacles, despite the obstacles that have been in front of this small country that is surrounded by enemies. Then it becomes a different kind of idealistic approach that they see as something, this is really something I might want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Bracha, earlier I mentioned that when you're asking us which words stood out in one of the readings, and I mentioned tears, you didn't follow up on that, but I wonder if in response to what this lady just said, maybe does it have to be necessary to cry to gain strength to achieve something better and to fully appreciate what you have achieved? Jews have cried a lot throughout history. What's the function of the tears in relation to progress?
The significance of tears is that we cry for different reasons, but the fact is that we're moved to tears.
Yeah. It can be tears of joy.
We have to be moved. We have to be moved. Stephen.
So my final comment is that,
You don't mean that.
yeah, no, in 1958, I was, went to Israel. Okay, when I was 16 years old with the United Synagogue, Stuart Rosenberg and the organization at that time. We'll go forward all these years till 20 years ago when my daughter went there with her one granddaughter who's now 22, and my grandson was born there. It was at the time when I'll mention another movement, I will, the Reform movement, was outwardly saying, "Do not go to Israel. It's not safe right now." I recall that. If I'm mistaken, any one of you correct me. And I don't know where the position of the conservative. We know that the Orthodox movement has always said, to some degree, Israel is not a state. It's
Don't
it's
say
not a redeemed.
Orthodox. You mean
Okay.
the Haredim.
Haredim, okay. But having said that, I personally said to my daughter at that time, go to Israel. That's where we belong. And so in regards to that, Americans versus Canadians, in our thinking, I am privileged to be a Canadian. It's where I reside, but my home is Israel. I am a Canadian Jew. I am not I'm not American first. I'm an Israeli first. My heritage is being part of my nation, and that's my one nation. I reside in Canada.
Thank you, Stephen.
Do we have to dichotomize? Can't we have love and loyalty to both?
Yes, but I'm not going to love you if you don't let me stick to the topic of tonight, Elliot. I said I want to address what you're bringing up, but not tonight. Okay? All right. So this kibbutz galuyot, the people who do come, and they came from all over. And despite the period of the tzena, austerity, Israel didn't break, it grew. And that's wondrous, wondrous. But there's no denying it created economic divides, an unexpected split between Ashkenazi and Sephardi, the religious and secular divide, which we'll talk, if not today, next week, and a divide between those not totally sold on the need for the ultimate militancy that came about. In other words, and this is how I'm going to get to Buber, because we're discussing the dreams and we'll end with some dreams, but we have to realize that once they come, there were challenges, because that's life, that's reality. So there were those who come and don't want to take on a new psyche, mentality of we're now going to have to be militant, even though they might have gone through what they went previously. Then there are those who realize we have to become physically strong. Now, those who came and weren't looking or coming just because they wanted to be free and have our own land, but they were also focusing on creating Jewish culture and, if you were Martin Buber, harmony with our neighbors. And that's why it was so important to him to live in the neighborhood that he was living in until he was asked to leave. Martin Buber, without a doubt, most assuredly asserted that we need our own land. But he was very hesitant regarding people who became nationalistic as an end in itself. And he encouraged in his I thou strategy a binational state of Jews and Arabs. And he had a difficult time, but he never gave up. And perhaps you're familiar with the name Judah Magnus, who was a Reform rabbi. Stephen mentioned the Reform movement before, and he became the first president of Hebrew University. And he shared Buber's beliefs about harmony with the Arabs, but he was more realistic. And he writes a letter to Martin Buber when Buber turned 70. And keep in mind that what we're talking about here is the energy that they came with, and the hope, and the idealized belief that they'd be able to rebuild, and yes, build a nation that could be an Or L'Goyim. But then they come and they realize to put all that into action, you have to face reality. And so we have the dreams, but what I'm suggesting to you is that we always have to be aware of the challenges. So Magnus writes the following: the tragedy to Buber of these days is not that after dancing and jubilation over the UN decision of 29th November 1947, partitioning Palestine and internationalizing Jerusalem, confusion and anxiety now reign, or the loss of dear and irrevocable human life because of the fighting and more fighting. You know, that was the dilemma of Ben-Gurion. He wanted to declare the state, even though he knew immediately that would mean war. Quite a dilemma, or not. The end of which cannot be foreseen. The tragedy is that today, as in the days of the Navi Micha, the heads of the house of Yaakov and the lords of the house of Israel build Zion with blood, though with changes of nuance and definition corresponding to the circumstances of time. You thought, my dear friend, Martin, and believed that Zion could be built not with blood and fire, but with untiring creative work and by means of mutual understanding with our neighbors. You know quite well that in the history of humanity, states have almost always been established only with blood and injustice. You must keep that in mind and not become depressed. And Buber didn't give up. He didn't give up of his dream. Now, there were others who also felt that this wasn't going to be a country just to be the safe haven, but that they were very concerned about what the nature of the country would be. And we will discuss that next week. There are issues such as the religious secular divide. There are issues, do we want to have an Israeli culture or a Jewish culture? Are they different? Are they the same? How much individualism can we have in a country that was built on a sense of community, of a collective? How much responsibility do we have a right to feel for our country And do we balance that with a sense of responsibility for the world? You know, this was an issue that was discussed when the war in the Ukraine began. Everybody thinks of themselves, but Israel has a right to be proud that it has done a great deal, but maybe it felt it can't do DEF because it's taking care of itself. And every country does that. Now, we will discuss the status quo, what was decided as far as state and religion. But throughout all of that, I believe in the period of the pioneers, the overall feeling was of energy. And we are now going to be able to build. I grew up with parents who would sing, Anu banu artsa livnotu libanot ba. We came to the land, and this is very, very crucial. Livnot, to build, ulehibanot ba, and be built. And that's so significant that we're not just doing for the country, but by us doing for the country, that's building us up. I think that's very, very important. It gives me something. There was an idealistic devotion at the beginning of the state to reconstruction, and I think it still exists. Yes, we are a rich country, and that's, as all human beings, going to have certain impact. But there's still that idealism. And there was an intimate reverence for the land. Let's make the desert bloom again. And this is reflected in many of the folk songs that we're familiar with and some that we're not. And I'd like us to just take a look at a few and leave the other topics that I've mentioned to get into for next week. So Bialik also wrote this, Shir Ha'avodah V'Amlacha, Song of the Work and the Labor. Mi yatzilenu me'ra'av, who shall save us from hunger? Who shall feed us plenty of bread? And who shall give us a glass of milk to drink? Whom to thank, whom to bless, the work and the labor? Who shall give us coverage in the cold? And who shall give us light in the darkness? Who shall draw the water from the well? Whom to thank, whom to bless, the work and the labor? And who planted trees in the garden for the fruit and the shade, every species and kind, and in the fields had sown grain? Whom to thank, whom to bless, the work and the labor? Who made us a roof-covered area, a fence for the garden, borders for the vineyard, and who troubled and who took care of the Shabbat, of the holy day? Whom to thank, whom to bless, the work and the labor? Therefore, we work, therefore we labor, always on each day of the week. Heavy is the burden, pleasant is the burden. And at times of leisure, we sing aloud, songs of gratitude, songs of blessing for the work and the labor. Why does this song by Bialik speak to everyone in that period of time? What is he doing here? And we've talked about this in other discussions, in other contexts, about God wanting us to partner with him. So what Bialik is saying here, normally when we say, who are we going to thank for the food? We say, we're going to say a bracha. We're going to say Birkat Hamazon. But this is demanding that human beings get involved with this process of building. That's what stands out. as I read this, we keep the traditions, but we don't look anymore at it as a project as once was looked upon when the Mashiach will come. And that's why Cook was the way he was. Mark Wachowski, O Zion, cast off your sorrow. May your anguish cease. Soon happiness will enter your fortress. Your loved ones are returning. You have this sense that Israel was desolate and missed the young and the old dancing in Arei Yehuda. And Levin Kipnis, to the mountaintop. To the mountaintop, the road shall not be barred. To exiles returning from beyond the mountain, as of old, the land of beauty calls us up the mountainside to the summit. What is symbolic in the word mountaintop? What is this now saying? Where Shosky just talked about will be returning. What does Kipnis add to that thought? We are returning. The exiles are returning. What does
Is there a call
mountaintop?
here for partnership, a working together of the many diverse cultures to create something that is gratifying to all? A mosaic as opposed to something that is very homogenized?
Okay, I don't know that I necessarily see that in this particular, but in the previous perhaps, and that's being said, but here, what is he saying? We're not just returning, and we're not just returning to build, but it doesn't end there. What else?
We're going up, we're going up, we're going up, we're going up.
Exactly. That
Which
the
is
mountaintop.
how Aliyah is going up.
Yafet Sipora. Lofty aspirations. We had them then, and I believe we have them now. It just isn't easy to make it come about 100%. Stephen.
I
You
like
see, I was
many of-
right. You said 5 minutes ago your final word. I was right.
Yeah. Okay, so I have had in the past, and thank goodness in the future, in the past, great teachers such as your dear father of blessed memory, and others, and today many teachers. You are equal to any and all of them, and I would like a request I'm making of you. When you quote poetry in the future, could you please consider using one of your teachers' poets when appropriate? Simcha Simkovich. Simcha Simkovich. That's a request I have of you.
I can picture you bringing him to shul on Shabbat. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
I'm seeing actually something else in this last poem, To the Mountaintop. To me, it recalled a scene of Moses going up to the mountain,
Absolutely.
and reaching the summit and discussing with God and receiving the Torah and bringing it down to the people. And I see here that everyone is being given a chance to achieve certain heights and to be able to be part of that acceptance of Torah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. Friends, I see that it is 9:13. I have much more to say on this, and so we will carry it over into next week. Although I'm going to have a busy week because I'm going to have to start working on Elliot's topic. Okay.
Bracha, I think you should devote several sessions to what you're referring to, the idea of the multicultural makeup of Israel and how we can work together to arrive at higher heights, higher levels.
By the way,
Okay.
according to what you mentioned before, I like the idea that it's not limited to one location, בערי יהודה ובחוצות ירושלים. So no matter where you are in the country, it applies to you.
Oh, absolutely.